everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Today, we're going to be examining gambling in America, but a very specific slice of gambling in America, and that's gambling on the open water. Gambling on the mighty Mississippi, gambling on the Great Lakes, gambling on the Pacific Ocean. What would lead gamblers to leave the safety of dry land to seek shelter in the open water? We'll be examining all those forces, and we'll be looking at three specific areas: the Mississippi River itself, Chicago around the turn of the last century, and Los Angeles, California in the 1920s and 30s. Now, before we get started, make sure you hit the like and subscribe buttons. Likes are important, but subscriptions are vital to the growth of the channel. Now, let's get started. We're going to go back to the Mississippi River, 1835, in the little town of Vicksburg, Mississippi. Little town of 2,000 people on the banks of the Mississippi. And what was going on there at that time? Well, they were having an awful lot of problem with gamblers. To read the newspapers of the era, you would have thought that the gamblers had taken over the town. As a matter of fact, the local mayor had issued a proclamation giving the gamblers only 24 hours to leave town. And when they didn't, all heck broke loose. Here's what happened. Headline: Vicksburg, Mississippi, the Vicksburg Whig, the gambler's fate. An account of one of the most horrible proceedings of which we have read in modern times came to hand just as our paper was going to press. The scene is Vicksburg, Mississippi. So what happened was a half a dozen of the gamblers chose not to leave, and they holed up in a gambling den, amazingly enough. The local population did what local populations have done since time immemorial. They took the law into their own hands. They charged the gambling house. They conducted a running gun battle with the gamblers. And then North, one of the gamblers, and four of his depraved associates were taken, conducted to the scaffold, and immediately executed in the presence of the congregated assembly. So they hung the guys. They lynched them. They lynched the five gamblers. Now, you would think, how would that go over with the rest of the state? How would that go over with other cities up and down the line of the Mississippi? Well, quite honestly, they kind of liked it after the initial shock. Here we have another headline from Columbus, Mississippi. We learned from the Courier and Journal that Natchez has followed the example of Vicksburg in ridding that city of gamblers. Although they do say no hemp was used in this particular altercation. He says, but some 15 or 20 roulette and faro tables have been broken to pieces. It says here the gamblers will soon have no abiding place in South Mississippi. Where will their headquarters be? Well, what do you think they do? Well, the gamblers, they go on ship. They get off the land and they start running with the passenger ships up and down the Mississippi, and we enter the era of the riverboat gambler. There's a fellow by the name of George Duval who wrote a book in the 1890s called 40 Years on the Mississippi as a Gambler. All right? So here's a little excerpt of that, and gives you a sense of what was going on at the time. It says here, the next day I was on my way to St. Paul, as at that time there was a great immigration in that direction. I took passage on a steamer that had nearly 300 people on board, going there to buy homes, and of course they had plenty of money with them. So he's going to take advantage of the homesteaders. After the supper tables were cleared, a game of poker was commenced, then another, until there were 5 games going. I sat at one of the tables looking for a long time until at length one of the gentlemen said to me, "Do you ever indulge?" I said, "Hardly ever, but do you mind if I sit in on this game?" It says here that the bar was open and all appeared to enjoy a good drink, but I never cared for anything stronger than lemonade. I commenced to try some of the tricks I'd learned, and by daybreak, between me and the barman, we had all their money. I made about $1,300 or $40,000 that night. Now, why would they flee to the river? Well, the river has some advantages here. Why would the gamblers go to the river? Think about it. On a trip from St. Louis down to Vicksburg, what law would apply on the river? The law of Illinois, the law of Missouri, the law of Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, the federal government? Who the heck knows? What law really applied was really whatever the law the captain chose to enforce. He could turn a blind eye to gambling, or he could crack down. Most of the captains apparently turned a blind eye to it. Now, gambling on the Mississippi goes on uninterrupted to the end of the century. But when you're gambling on the Mississippi, you're playing card games, dice games. You can't partake of the number one gambling activity of the late 19th century, and that's horse racing. And in Chicago, they love their horse racing. But it can be a little inconvenient at times to get out to the track and place your bets. So there's all kinds of off-track betting, bookie joints up and down State Street in Chicago. For a little more exotica, though, somebody had an incredible idea. What he did is he figured that if he could just get people across the state line into Indiana, which is, like 20 miles away, well, then he could conduct his business of gambling with impunity. And what he established was something called the Long Beach Turf Exchange. It says here in the Chicago Tribune, August 8, 1901, "You're invited to the finest equipped and only Monte Carlo in America, delightfully situated in Lake County, Indiana, near the Standard Oil Company's works." So it's near the gas works. That's very lovely. It says here, "There will be no interference from county or state officials." I assume everyone's been appropriately bribed. And it says, "Open the year round." What they don't tell you is that the gambling house was surrounded by a stockade, kind of like Fort Apache, with giant iron gates, and the grounds were patrolled by trained police dogs. But this was such an operation. That they arranged for special trains to bring the patrons out to the casino. It says here in the Chicago Tribune, May 19th, 1901, "Special trains to Long Beach Turf Exchange via Lakeshore Railway. Running time 30 minutes. Trains leave Van Buren Street Depot at 12:35, 1:10, and 1:45, returning at 4, 4:40, and 5:30. They're running 3 separate trains out and back to the casino in Indiana. All was well for a while, but the owners of Hawthorne Raceway, which was the big local track in Chicago, noticed that their receipts were down. And the reason the receipts were down was everyone was going off to this casino because it was a lot of fun. So, not wanting to miss out on any revenue, they came up with an incredible idea. Remember, they rely at that point in time not on telephone lines but telegraph lines to get the results of all the races out to the casino. They merely cut the lines to Indiana so that none of their results could get to the casino on the shores of Lake Michigan. So, what happened was, well, it says big pool room is closed. And what we have to tell you here, pool rooms don't mean it's not a billiard hall. A pool room is a place where money is pooled, pari-mutuel wagering, that sort of thing, where you get together and everyone throws their money in and bets on just about anything. They called it a pool room. So big pool room is closed. Gambling den near Whiting shut by its manager. Turf exchange at Long Beach, of which Indiana officials professed ignorance, succumbs to the fight made against it by the Hawthorne racetrack, which cut off its quotations and thereby starved the casino of its revenue. So that eventually closes, but there's pent up demand for gambling in Chicago, and a couple of the gamblers get together and they have a wonderful idea, very innovative. They're going to go and buy a 300-foot long pleasure cruiser, it's a cruise ship, small, 300 feet long, but something that could hold 800 to 1,000 people. They're going to set up a gambling casino on the cruise ship, and they're going to float that cruise ship 4 or so miles out into Lake Michigan, just on the other side of the Indiana border. They're going to cater to everyone from Chicago, but they're in no way going to be in the jurisdiction of Chicago, and they've got it figured that nobody can bug them. So they try it. The ship that they choose is something called the City of Traverse. Here we have an article from the Inter-Ocean, Chicago, Illinois, Sunday, March 18th, 1900. It says, this is showing what kind of ship it was. The Lake Michigan and Lake Superior Transportation Company will operate 4 boats, the Peerless, the City of Traverse, Jay Gould, and Osceola. The passenger boats will make weekly trips to Mackinac Island and Lake Superior points beginning April 15th. So they're cruise ship, pleasure ships, small cabin cruisers, but they're going to convert them. They're going to convert this thing into a floating gambling emporium. Now, Chicago Tribune, Thursday, June 22nd, 1905, describing the ship. Long, low, rakish craft makes a mysterious trip. Movements of the City of Traverse revive suspicion of scheme to float gambling palace. It says here that the craft was newly painted and strung from the mast were wires high in the air. These connected 2 cross arms, and to rivermen signified that the vessel was fitted with wireless telegraphy. Brand new stuff. Like, this stuff's 5 years old tops. Mysterious cables fell over the sides and disappeared into the water. They're going to bypass the telegraph wire lines by using radio transmission, and they're going to receive the radio transmission out there in the lake. So most people think that the first, or one of the first uses of radio on ships was the Titanic. But we're 7 years before the Titanic. Forget saving lives. This is all about placing bets. Now, hopefully you're looking at a picture of the City of Traverse, and if you look closely, if you got a 105-inch TV, you can probably see the wires connecting the smokestack back to the ship with the telecommunication equipment. Now, the Inter-Ocean is interesting since it's the name of a newspaper in Chicago in the early 1900s, but it's totally appropriate given our subject matter. matter today. The Inter-Ocean of June 25th, 1905. Marine pool room ready. Successful rehearsal on board City of Traverse. First business trip of bookmakers' latest device to evade law will be made this week. Now, how much money did they have invested in this scheme? With more than $25,000 already spent in the equipment for their floating pool room, Bud White, and he's the main principal, Clint Colby, and the other bookmakers behind the City of Traverse floating wireless messaging gambling palace announced yesterday that the public would be invited to take its first trip Tuesday or Wednesday. This is big secret stuff. So the headline the next day is Private Detectives Guard Floating Gambling. Crowd of curious people watches O'Leary's boat, but none is permitted to board. It says, carefully guarded by private detectives and surrounded by a crowd of curious idlers, the City of Traverse, Jim O'Leary's new floating gambling house, lay on the dock at the foot of Paulina Street and strained at the cables, all prepared to make her initial trip yesterday. The big boat was resplendent in a new coat of paint. The second time they've mentioned a coat of paint. The newspaper got on board and they had to look around. They were allowed to look around, and it's set up like a horse racing track. It says the main deck has two compartments which greatly resemble ticket booths at a circus, or places where you're going to get your ticket for the race. And they've got large tables covered in green felt. Oh, I wonder what they're going to do there. It says they have 15. There's 15 detectives guarding the ship as it lays at dock. Now, the next day, the Inter-Ocean reports on June 23rd, 1905, that they tested the wireless equipment. It says here, test of wireless on gambler's ship, City of Traverse, known as floating pool room, scheduled to take first load of bettors on lake tomorrow. What is said to have been a successful test of the wireless telegraphy apparatus for receiving race results in mid-lake was made on the steamer City of Traverse yesterday, and the pool room boat is scheduled to take its first crowd of bettors out into the lake tomorrow. Well, this is a unique, new, and novel device. It's one of those great ideas that really should work, and technically it does work, but we'll get into the nuts and bolts of it. It lasts, but not as long as it should have. All right, here we go. On June 30th, 1905, floating pool room makes its first trip. City of Traverse spends afternoon circling about points in mid-lake while bookmakers accept bets on races. Now, the police were extremely interested in what was going on, and they actually sent detectives onto the ship to see what the heck was going on. It says here, city detectives accompany boat to watch operation. They report to Chief Schutler that they can make no arrests. Plans being made to put stop to gambling. Well, how are they going to put stop to gambling if they can make no arrests? Here's a funny aside. There are only 3 rules on the ship. Here's the 3 rules that they quote. Can't get on the ship if you're drunk. If you get drunk while you're on the ship, they're not going to give you any more booze. And absolutely no women allowed. Sorry, ladies, can't get on the boat. Now, the Inter-Ocean on June 30th publishes an interesting picture of the crowds milling about the ship just before launch, and they show the ship actually launching. And the headline is "Gambling Steamer City of Traverse as it left the dock, and the crowd watched its departure." But the police are as innovative as the gamblers. The police, there's no law that specifically these guys are breaking. At least nothing major. But that doesn't mean they're not going to keep trying. So what they do is they go after the telegraph operator. They just like remember the track shut down the telegraph lines, and that's basically starved them out. They're going to try to do the same thing by cutting off the telegraph wire, the radio transmissions. Headline in the Inter-Ocean, July 4th, 1905. "We are pinched" is flashed to gamblers. Senders of wireless race results to the City of Traverse are raided by police, and grief reigns among bettors. So they've gone in, confiscated the equipment, closed down the telegraph office, the radio office, and have, in effect, shut down the City of Traverse. It says here on July 4th, 1905 in the Tribune, wireless wires are cut. Police raid DeForest plant and stop lake pool room service. DeForest is an interesting name. Lee DeForest is one of the pioneers of radio in the world. He's certainly the pioneer in America. And it's his company, the DeForest radio company, that's been providing the City of Traverse with their information. It says here, though, injunction is to be asked. Pending federal court action, Boat Traverse will stay in port. They're going to bring an injunction. They're going to seek injunctive or relief to get their equipment back and get back in operation. Well, let's see if they're going to be successful. It says, in the other one, it said, "We are pinched." In the Tribune, they say that what was Morse coded out to them is, "We are pulled." This terse wireless message received by the 500 gamblers aboard the City of Traverse in mid-lake yesterday afternoon startled the followers of the races. So there were 500 people on board when the plug got pulled. Says here that in the Trib on the same article that there was anxiety on the boat. Said that there was a temporary resumption of service coming apparently from some other DeForest station. So apparently the DeForest company had multiple stations. The main one got pulled. They tried it on the other. They tried getting the transmissions going on the other one, but apparently the police got involved and shut that one down too. Bud White, the owner of the boat, says that until they get the issue settled in court, the city of Traverse is going to remain in the dock. But this is great. What heinous crimes are they going to charge the people with? The warrants served on the DeForest people charged violations of the ticker ordinance. Assistant Chief Schuttler said that a more serious charge might be made later. The best I could find with information with respect to what a ticker ordinance is, it's violation of a minor local law. So they're bringing some kind of tiny little offense, more to be a pain in the butt than to be anything else, but it does shut them down. And it's noted in the Chicago Tribune on July 5th that the floating pool room is tied up. City of Traverse unable to get wireless message remains in dock. They note here though, and they hired good lawyers. The gamblers aren't fooling around here. They hired good lawyers. Here's what's happening. Application for an injunction restraining the authorities from interfering with the function of the wireless company as a common carrier will be made today by manager Oker. They're making an argument that they're interfering with interstate commerce, and that's an argument that just might work. Well, look at that. It worked. The Interocean, July 20th, 1905. Gambling ship to plow waves again. Court restrains city from interfering with DeForest Wireless Company and sending racing news to city of Traverse. Interstate Commerce Act is foundation of corporation. You can't monkey around. This is kind of similar to what's going. It's nothing to do with it, but it's kind of similar to what's going on in NCAA sports, college sports right now. Once you start interfering with commercial relations, the Supreme Court in any era does not like that. And if you are allowed to operate your business unless there are specific prohibitions to that business. You can't just dink around with it the way the police are doing in Chicago. It says here the raid of authorities and seizure of the instruments unwarranted. Schuttler says, well, that's the police chief says he will proceed on other lines. What other lines? The only line he's got is he can compel the forces at his disposal to be a complete total pain in the rear. He can make life so uncomfortable for the gamblers that they just cease going to the gambling ship. He doesn't have the power or authority to shut it down. He doesn't have the authority to do anything other than write a ticket. So he uses everything in his power to try to shut it down. And here we are, Thursday, August 3rd, 1905. He says here, gambling boat to defy Collins. Collins is actually the chief of the police. City of Traverse will sail from the government pier and claim protection under the interstate commerce regulations. The city of Traverse, the wireless gambling boat, will resume its trip into Lake Michigan at 2 o'clock. Its owners have outwitted the chief of police. What they do is they claim to they're totally ignoring the opinions and the proclamations of the chief or the commissioner, and they're going full speed ahead. So they're going to try to, but once they're out there, the police are going to try to be that pain in the butt, I said. Police arrest boat gamblers. 10 employees of the Traverse City taken, but principals escaped. And what heinous charge are the employees now charged with? They're booked as vagrants. I looked up the vagrancy laws in Illinois in 1900. It's a $50 fine, which I'm sure the employer will gladly pay. It says if court sustains charge, police will continue warfare indefinitely. They're going to continue being a pain in the butt until this thing shuts down. And how much time, effort, and expense did the city of Chicago expend in trying to lay these 10 vagrancy charges? It says the raid was made possible by a special form of warrant drawn up by the corporation. It says here, for 10 days, Detective Westbrook and Clements had been making daily trips aboard the Traverse where they made memoranda of the names of the men employed in handling the books. As a sequel to their labors, more than 20 vagrancy warrants were sworn out by Westbrook. And they were able to arrest 10 guys for vagrancy. Finally, though, after a year of ceaseless harassment of the ship, it all comes to a head. It says here on August 9th, 1906 in the Tribune, Foghorn teases gambler ship, tugs tags after the city of Traverse, but doesn't spoil wireless servers. Lifesavers to rescue. Think whistle is distress signal. Others report the boat on fire. Let me break that down. What happened was the police took out a giant foghorn. They started blasting the ship with a foghorn on the crazy idea that the high vibrations caused by the loud noise would somehow interfere with the radio signals. Of course, it doesn't, but it was a pain in the butt. They called in a phony fire alarm and caused fire ships to come out. They called in a distress signal saying the ship was sinking, which caused about 100 boats to come and respond because they thought there was a maritime tragedy going on. And so sloops and motorboats and fishing boats and everybody and their uncle showed up out here. But gamblers don't like that. Gamblers don't want foghorns and lunacy going on. And I guess if you're willing to spend the equivalent of $100,000 a day to bother this ship, eventually it will go under. And that's what happened. The police were such consistent pains in the rear that eventually it just became unprofitable. And by 1907, the boat's back as a touring excursion boat. So the 2-year experiment for dedicated offshore gambling ships was in fact a success, but only made a failure because of the unlimited resources that the government had to bring to bear to the problem. You want a little extra insight into organized crime and criminality in Chicago in the 1900s? Check out my Charles Gondorf episode. Now, we move 2,200 miles to the west to Los Angeles, California, 1927. Starting around 1924, crime, we're not going to call it crime. Gamblers in the Los Angeles area took it upon themselves to copy the Chicago experiment and set up 2 or 3 gambling ships. Now, how can they do that in Los Angeles? Well, there's a thing called the 3-mile limit. If you go out beyond 3 miles from shore, you're actually in international waters, and no law applies. I guess the law of the sea applies, but certainly not the law of the state of California. So if you can dock your ship 4 miles from shore, you can load people up at the Santa Monica Pier and just bring them out all day long, and that's what they started to do. We have an article here, the Los Angeles Times, Saturday, July 9th, 1927. Test case in gaming ship. District attorney will push prosecution in order to determine state jurisdiction. Determined to make a test case as to whether or not a boat anchored 4.5 miles off the county shoreline near Venice can operate a floating gambling den, the district attorney's office issued a complaint yesterday against F.U. Baggs, and that's the guy's name, F.U. Baggs, manager of the fishing boat or barge, charged him with conducting a gambling game in the state. So they're bringing the first, and this is going to be the first of many actions that are brought against the owners. This particular one was resolved in favor of the boat owner, and the boats continued to be, they were allowed with some harassment throughout the late 1920s. So we have an article of the Los Angeles Evening Post of July 5th, 1928, gamblers to defy police blockade. With a blockade imposed by the Long Beach Police Department determined to cut off all patronage to the gambling vessel Johanna Smith from Long Beach, operators of the gaming ship prepared today to carry the fight to the finish in the courts by seeking an injunction and planning to open business on 2 boats off Venice, which they did. And the boats continued to be allowed throughout the late 1920s and into the 1930s. But you've got gambling ships run by members of the criminal element in the open seas with no law. What could possibly go wrong? Well, what happened in 1933 that brought attention to the whole matter was there were 3 murders, 3 unsolved murders on the gambling ships, and that got the district attorney's attention. And so here we have a headline in the Los Angeles Times, September 26, 1933: gambling ship war launched. Fitz, the district attorney, declares patrons face jail as witnesses. Patrol on docks set and arrests ordered. Gangster curb to be used against operators. They're going to crack down, and they're looking for witnesses to the murders. They're going to try to involve as many people as possible and just make the gambling ships less palatable to the general public. The goings on in the gambling ships become such an item of news that it even makes its way to the Midwest. Here we have the Cleveland Plain Dealer in November 5th, 1933. Underworld and society secrets of the gay gambling ships where 3 were slain. Beyond the 3-mile limit, murder and merriment went on, and thugs and debs rubbed elbows. Big full-page article on the goings-on in Los Angeles on the gambling ships. And the concept of a gambling ship is it's so popular that they make a movie of it, of the whole scene. And it's called Gambling Ship, and it stars no other than Cary Grant. We have here an ad from the Waco Tribune Herald, July 23rd, 1933. Gambling ship at the Orpheum. Cary Grant and Benita Hume in Gambling Ship, the film of the sea beyond the 3-mile limit, which opened at the Orpheum Theater today. Inset Jake LaRue, the menace of the piece. The villain. Anyway, so Cary Grant makes a movie. I looked it up on IMDb. It got a 6. It's not a very good movie. I don't know if it'd be worth your time unless you have a real passion for gambling ships. But following the crackdown in 33 and 34, it looks like they decided, the owners of these ships decided to become a little bit more professional, a little more organized. And if you're going to be organized, why not get involved with real organized crime? And so a fellow by the name of Tony Cornero becomes involved as an owner of multiple ships. Now, Tony Cornero, if you've been reading the 1920s and early 1930s Los Angeles newspapers like I have been, you'll see that Tony Cornero, he's in the newspaper every week. He's known as the Rum King. He's the biggest bootlegger in Los Angeles County. I've pulled out, just to give you a sense of who Tony Cornero is, I've pulled out a Los Angeles Evening Post record newspaper from Friday, August 7th. And here it says, Rum King's Queen, he's the Rum King, it's about the woman, his girlfriend, Rum King's Queen tells of making $500,000. Winona Flora Houston, queen of the bootleggers, who aided Tony Cornero, Rum King, to pile up a fortune of $500,000, that's $15 million, and then was thrown over, she says, for a new mall. So she got jilted. He's picked up with another dame. He says, he threw me over for another dame 2 months ago, but he is my man, and I love him, and I'll get him out of this mess, no matter if it's the last thing I do. So that's kind of who he is. He's a celebrity. He's not as threatening. He's as big as Al Capone is in Chicago, but he's doing it in Chicago purely on the bootlegging end. It's amazing. Criminals at that point in time can become not just minor celebrities, major celebrities. All right, we have an article here from the Press-Telegram, Long Beach, California, August 7th, 1935. It says, Tango Man quizzed. Tango Man. Tango Man is Tony Cornero. Why is it the Tango Man? Because one of the boats he owns is called the Tango. And it says, mystery attached to the appearance at the grand jury rooms of Tony Cornero, former big shot bootlegger and reputed owner of the gambling barge Tango, moored near the Monte Carlo, another of the gambling ships. And the Monte Carlo is kind of cool too. The Monte Carlo is made out of cement. It's a 350-foot long former oil tanker, but made during the First World War when there were shortages of steel. And they made the boat out of cement. And that boat would continue to be a casino up until the point it was lost during a storm in 1939. And its shell can still be seen on the beach at Coronado, in San Diego. So anyways, go have a look at that. Go online, you can have a look at that at the Monte Carlo. Now, the main boat, the major boat that Tony Cornero operates is called the SS Rex, and it really is something special. I'm going to quote extensively here now from a full-page ad in the Daily News, Los Angeles, June 21, 1939. The ad says, show up at the place to win, the time of your life. SS Rex, set your own limit. Racing results daily. We pay track odds. There's only one SS Rex anchored off Santa Monica Pier. And that's where it would be anchored, in Santa Monica Bay, and that's very important. It's about 4.5 miles out in Santa Monica Bay. Now let's look into this ad a little closer. It's great. They want to tell you what a wonderful time you're going to have if you go out to the Rex. And you know what? You probably would have had a wonderful time. Here we got, dine and dance to the rhythms of the Townsmen. So that's their house band. Cuisine by Henri, French cuisine. We serve bonded drinks exclusively. No hooch for you. You get good stuff here. It says supervision by Hi Hoffman of the Trocadero fame. So the man running it's from the Trocadero, used to be at the Trocadero, and the maitre d' is a fellow named Le Baron. It says here, join the fun. Feminine guests, attended or not, are delighted with the unfailing courtesy and rigidly enforced standards which make their visit to the Rex invariably pleasant. And then they rattle off a bunch of facts about the ship. And the facts are that they've serviced, since it started, over 1 million patrons. Now, how can they get 1 million patrons? Well, because this ship is big enough, it can seat, or accommodate, according to the Department of Commerce, 1,990 people. You get 2,000 people on this thing at a time. It says here that the SS Rex maintains a ship's physician and nurse on board at all times, that it complies with all safety regulations. And get a load of this. Doesn't this sound modern? Every person employed by the SS Rex must be an American citizen, registered with the U.S. Department of Commerce. Tony Cornero is a Republican. Who would have known? Oh, anyways, it says, why experiment? Go with the best. And then they want you to know that the games that they're running there are straight up. There's no crooked games here. Notice, to whom it may concern, we, the management of the SS Rex, anchored 3 miles off Santa Monica Pier, do hereby challenge any movie or radio star, sponsor or broadcasting station, newspaper, or any other person or persons to find on board the Rex any illegally or crookedly operated games. If anyone, and we mean anyone, can find aboard the SS Rex a falsely run game, then we will pay to that person or persons the sum of $100,000 cash on demand. The SS Rex is run honestly and above board and is operated by courageous, open-minded, fearless American citizens. That's the most Republican thing I've heard in the last couple of years. Anyways, they battle the authorities. The authorities hate the ship. They think it's not good for the moral fiber of Los Angeles County. The DA does what every DA does at that time. Just think of Al Capone. They try to get him on a tax charge. They bring in the feds and they go over the books and they find that he owes $500,000 in taxes or more. And that leads us to something that has become known as the Battle of Santa Monica. They attempted to serve warrants on Cornero and his associates, but they had set up a half a dozen fire hoses all around the ship. And as the officers tried to board the ship, they were blasted with the fire hoses and knocked them right off the stairs back into the water. Here's the article of Los Angeles Times, November 7th, 1939. Rex fire hose halts officers. Defenders of gambling ship repulse deputies with barrage from deck. Says the fire hose defenders of the SS Rex are still militantly repulsing any attempt of sheriff's officers armed with sundry legal papers to board the flagship of Admiral Tony Cornero. It was disclosed yesterday by Attorney General Earl Warren. Attorney General Earl Warren, he's the one bringing the charges. Earl Warren, the Earl Warren Court, he's the Supreme Court, he's the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court later. So that's who they've got here, trying to prosecute Tony Cornero. But Cornero says, well, Cornero eventually gives himself up, at least to be served the documents. And he says here, he accepts service. It says Cornero appeared yesterday before Deputy Counsel Gordon Bowler and accepted service of the order which the three deputies had tried unsuccessfully to deliver at his cabin door. He made the stipulation, however, that the action be delayed pending ruling of the state Supreme Court as to whether the Rex lies within the 3-mile limit. And that is the key to this whole thing. If he's 4 miles out and he's outside the 3-mile limit, the game goes on. But the government has a different view of what constitutes the 3-mile lit. This is going to require some fancy finger work here, because here's what we got. Santa Monica Bay is a loop. Tony and his boat have taken the position that as long as he keeps at least 3 miles off the coast from anywhere in that loop in Santa Monica Bay, that he's in international waters. The government's taking the position that, hey, bays don't count. Chesapeake Bay goes in 100 miles. You can't just hug the coast and say you're in international waters. You got to start at the beginning of the bay. And they draw a line from Point Dume to Point Vicente. And if they draw that line, the Santa Monica Bay is like this. If you draw that line from those 2 points, then what happens is, in order to get 3 miles out of that jurisdiction, you got to go 3 miles behind that line, which would actually put you about 18 miles off the coast. And if you're 18 miles off the coast, your business shuts down, because it will take 2 hours for a boat to come out there with the passengers, and nobody's going to sit on a rolling boat for 2 hours just to go place some bets. So everything hinges on that. And guess what the Court of Appeal in the state of California rules? Well, they rule in favor of the government, and they say that it's that line, and that therefore they've got to move that boat out, and that ends it. Well, at least that ends the SS Rex. World War II intervenes now, and there's not a lot of action in World War II. You worry about Japanese submarines and such things. So he's quiet. Tony Cornero's quiet for the duration. But in 1946, he's back out, and he buys a new boat. And he names it the Lux. The last one was the Rex. This one's the Lux, and he sets it up not off Santa Monica Bay, but Long Beach, where it's straight coastline. It can be 4 miles out there, and he's okay. But the government's on his tail again, and they say that he's violating all kinds of local and state gambling laws, and they charge him, and he goes to trial. And December 13th, 1946, Los Angeles Evening Citizen headline: Cornero acquitted. Lux gambling ruled legal. None of state's business. No laws broken, judge says. Gambling ship Admiral Tony Cornero Strala, that's his other name, Strala, but we never went by that, and 3 associates were acquitted in Superior Court today of conspiring to violate Long Beach anti-gambling ordinances in operation of the floating casino Lux. So he beats the rap. So he should have the ship. It should be working. No. because the government never gives up. You know, they talk about how many regulations there are and how that on any given day, the average citizen probably violates 20 laws that he knows nothing about. Well, that's what happened here is that, well, headline, Wilmington Daily Press Journal, Wilmington, California, October 20th, 1947. It says, scrap gaudy gambling ship. The gaudy career of the gambling ship Lux, which 1 year ago floated its attractions offshore from Long Beach, today faced a romantic end in the Napa River junk pile. The Coast Guard yesterday towed the once luxurious ship to the steel production division of Basalt Rock Company. Government has taken possession of it, and they're breaking it down. And why? It says here, the ship, which was elaborately outfitted for gambling, had opened for business off Southern California in 46. For several days, customers arrived and departed by water taxi. Then the government stepped in and seized the ship, charging that it had been licensed for coastwise trade rather than gambling. So it had been licensed to carry cargo, not people, and it certainly wasn't licensed as a gambling ship. They had the wrong license, therefore they confiscated it. Tony Cornero sued, he lost, the government took the ship, broke it down, and kept all the money because of the tax liens. So Tony Cornero's out, and that's the last we're going to hear of a gambling ship, of an illegal gambling ship, or not illegal, but a potentially illegal gambling ship off the shores of Los Angeles. Now, you know, we've got all kinds of gambling boats now. You've got every cruise ship has a gambling den. There are casino ships on the Mississippi River. Heck, there's a casino every 50 miles down the interstate. You can gamble online, and apparently if you're in the NBA, you can gamble on games you're participating in. Gambling is ubiquitous now, but it wasn't always that way. And it was a little more romantic back in the 40s. And Tony Cornero, that's not the end of his story. Let's finish up Tony Cornero's story. He does what anybody else was doing, any other mobster was doing in the late 1940s. He's got his eyes on Las Vegas. He goes to Vegas in the early days, around 1950, and he gets involved in the financing of a couple of casinos, including the Stardust. And then in 1955, he's at the Desert Inn, and he's shooting crap. He's got the dice in his hand. He's rolling them on the felt table when he has a heart attack and dies. It reminds me of those articles you read in the newspaper where the grieving widow goes, I know he fell 1,000 feet onto his head off Mount Whitney, but he died doing what he loved. Well, Tony Cornero died doing what he loved. So that's the end of our story today. But we're going to end it right, and we're going to end it with a cocktail. And our cocktail is the 3 Mile Limit. It's a cocktail that actually exists. 1.5 ounce of brandy or cognac, 3/4 ounce of white rum, a teaspoon of grenadine, a dash of lemon juice, and because we have fruits involved in this, we got to shake it. So it's going to be shaken vigorously on ice in a shaker, crack it down, strain it into a chilled martini glass, garnish with a lemon twist, and you got yourself a 3 Mile Limit. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed the show. Make sure to like and subscribe. Subscriptions are especially important in the growth of the channel. We'll be back in a few days with another episode. Hang in there, folks. Have a great day.